The TV presenter Greg Wallace hits back in the wake of allegations of inappropriate behaviour.
I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age.
Russia carries out more airstrikes in Syria in an attempt to halt the advance of rebels. Trying to reduce plastic pollution, talks about a global treaty break down without agreement.
Well, that sounds good off the bat.
And England's men make a winning start to their Test match series with New Zealand. Hello, good afternoon. The MasterChef presenter Greg Wallace has hit out against allegations of inappropriate behaviour on the show, saying they've come from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age. He released a statement on social media this morning, and his lawyers have previously said the allegations are false. 13 women have complained about him to a BBC News investigation. Our correspondent Noor Nanji has the latest.
Now, in the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef. This isn't right.
Greg Wallace, in an Instagram video this morning, hitting back at his critics. The MasterChef presenter has been under pressure after BBC News revealed a string of misconduct allegations against him. Our investigation heard from 13 people across a range of ages who worked across MasterChef and a number of different shows. One of them, Kirsty Walk, appeared on Celebrity MasterChef. The rest, former production staff. Gemma, not her real name, says Greg Wallace made her and her colleagues feel uncomfortable.
Working with Greg was tricky. He was constantly making sexually inappropriate jokes and comments. His behaviour was unacceptable in any kind of workplace.
He's posted this video today. What do you make of that?
I was mortified when I saw it this morning because it's so dismissive of the people that have come forward, especially the younger girls, and about their experiences. I don't know what class and age have to do with it.
This morning, a veteran Labour MP had this to say.
It's not a crime to be a middle-class woman of a certain age, I would say. Greg doesn't get it. The world has moved on.
I think the intervention is not wise. In terms of how he's going about defending himself, I understand the instinct when you feel you're backed into a corner, but I don't think it's smart to come out talking like that when at the moment he should probably be listening.
Since broadcast, more allegations have emerged, including from the author Emma Kennedy, who won Celebrity MasterChef in 2012. She says she complained about his behaviour at the time. Responding to Wallace's video, she told us, "Whoever made the allegations doesn't matter. The allegations stand. And playing they're having a go at me because I'm working class card is ridiculous." Greg Wallace remains one of the most recognisable faces on TV. But now production companies and broadcasters across the industry are facing questions about their handling of the allegations and the fact he has remained on air.
Anur is with me. And so where does this go now?
Well, I think it's fair to say there are wider questions for the BBC and also for the wider media industry. Why? Because it has emerged that there were complaints against him. One in 2017 relating to Celebrity MasterChef and the contestant Asma Mir, and then one in 2018, which we uncovered in our investigation relating to the game show Impossible Celebrities. Now, of course, Greg Wallace does deny any allegations of misconduct, but in 2018, we know that the BBC found elements of his behaviour both unacceptable and unprofessional, and he was given a 90-minute talking to by Kate Phillips, who is a senior BBC executive. So with that record of complaint, it does raise the question of whether the BBC should have been more responsive to complaints and more curious about his behaviour. But let's not forget, Greg Wallace has also been employed by a number of production companies, most notably Banijay, who make MasterChef, and they are now conducting a probe. But again, there are questions about the whistleblowing practices there and whether they were keeping workers, most of them young female freelancers, safe. And of course, all of this comes after a number of scandals involving presenters in television, and viewers might be wondering why there seem to be so many of them in this industry.
Noura Nanji, for now, thank you. Syria's ally Russia has carried out further airstrikes on parts of Syria in an attempt to halt the advance of rebels who've taken control of the country's second city, Aleppo. The Syrian army says it's preparing a counter-offensive against the Islamist forces who've taken the city in a surprise offensive. Just to warn you, this report from Barbara Plett-Usher contains images of children in distress.
They're alive, rescued from the wreckage moments after the bombs struck. Footage posted by the Syrian civil defense group, the White Helmets, shows the aftermath of an attack on the rebel stronghold of Idlib, southwest of Aleppo. The regime is fighting back. Thousands of people have been displaced, fleeing Aleppo and areas around Idlib. Their lives suddenly upended by this escalation in Syria's civil war.
We are following the battle news, and God willing, the regime will fall. We count night and day to return as the kids are tired and shocked. We left and came here in our clothes and nothing else.
The speedy capture of Aleppo took everyone by surprise, a devastating blow to the regime. The rebels continue their advance, but here the city's coming to terms with a new normal. Early signs that daily life goes on as before, and for those driven out by previous battles, a chance to return.
I returned to Aleppo after it was liberated, after we were driven out. I came back to experience this joy, to witness its greatness, its old neighbourhoods cleaned up after being desecrated by the Assad regime and its collaborators.
It isn't clear if the insurgents can hold on to the territory captured. But they have exposed the weakness of Bashar al-Assad's rule and his dependence on foreign forces to prop it up. Russia and Iran trying to bring the situation back under control, but consumed by their own conflicts. The front lines of Syria's civil war have been redrawn. No one knows what comes next. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, Beirut.
Votes are still being counted in Ireland's general election, but about half the seats have now been filled. The centre-right parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, seem most likely to form a coalition government for the second time. Our Ireland correspondent, Chris Page, is in Dublin with more. Chris.
Yes, Jane, it looks like Ireland is bucking the trend of the many elections held around the world this year by putting the two main parties of the last government back into power. The front runner to be the Prime Minister, known as the Taoiseach, is Micheál Martin, the leader of Fianna Fáil. He has had the top job before, but more recently he's been the Irish Foreign Minister, and his party is on course to win the most seats. He'll likely be joined in coalition once again by the other centre-right party, Fine Gael. Sinn Féin had hoped it could become the largest party in the Irish Parliament for the first time, but its challenge has faded. Now, the most chaotic moment of this weekend came here at the Main Count Centre in Dublin earlier this afternoon. A prominent gangland figure, Gerry Hutch, was in contention for a seat in Dublin. He's been described in court by a judge as the patriarch of a criminal organisation. He arrived, he was surrounded by security guards, and he was followed by dozens of journalists who challenged him. He refused to answer most of their questions, though. And Mr. Hutch, the independent candidate, was eventually knocked out of the race by a very slim margin. So overall, Ireland seems to have opted for continuity and stability. About half the seats filled, about half still to go.
All right, Chris, thanks very much. Chris Page there with the latest. A 34-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of rape at the Groucho Club in London. Police say the man from Hertfordshire was arrested yesterday and remains in custody. The private members club, which is in Soho in the centre of the city, had its licence suspended last month. In Georgia, thousands of protesters are on the streets for a fourth night after the government announced it was scrapping its bid to join the European Union. But today, Georgia's Prime Minister seemed to contradict the very comments that sparked the protests and has been speaking to the BBC's Steve Rosenberg in Tbilisi. Tell us more about what's been said, Steve.
Well, keep in mind, it was the Georgian Prime Minister's announcement 3 days ago suspending until the end of 2028 Georgia's bid to join the European Union. It was that announcement that has been bringing people onto the streets here since Thursday. Let's listen to what Prime Minister Kobakidze had said 3 days ago.
Today, we have decided not to put the issue of opening negotiations with the European Union on the agenda until the end of 2028.
And because the idea of joining the EU is so popular with Georgians, that decision to suspend accession talks caused shock and anger here. But when I asked the Prime Minister today whether he understood the public mood, he said, suspension? I didn't talk about that.
The response is very clear. So we have not suspended anything related to the European integration. It's just a lie. And there are the opposition leaders, there are the media outlets linked with the opposition who are just lying to these people.
But as we heard before, he had talked about suspending accession talks, and the EU heard it too. Today, the EU issued a statement criticising the decision and accusing Georgia of backsliding on democracy.
Steve, thanks so much. Steve Rosenberg there. Talks aimed at negotiating a global treaty to reduce plastic pollution have failed. The negotiators from 175 countries meeting in South Korea were unable to reach agreement on key issues, including reducing the amount of plastic produced in the first place. Our environment correspondent Jonah Fisher reports.
This was supposed to be the moment the world came together to tackle its addiction to plastic. But after 2 years of talks, the last week of it in South Korea, there was no sign of a global plastics treaty.
A few critical issues still prevent us from reaching a comprehensive agreement.
The key one, whether we need to reduce the amount of plastic we make. This year, the world made 430 million tonnes of plastic, and that figure could triple by 2060. Just 9% of it ends up being recycled, with the rest going to landfill, being burnt or dumped at sea. Plastic is mostly made from fossil fuels, and at the talks it was oil-producing countries who blocked any attempt to put cutting production in the treaty.
There should be no problem with producing plastics, because the problem is the pollution, not the plastics.
Attempting to phase out plastic and material rather than addressing the issue of plastic pollution risks undermining global progress and exacerbating economic inequalities.
Those who want action were left wondering if it was time to move ahead without the oil producers.
The high ambition countries need to step up and prevent a minority of groups from holding the rest of the world hostage from achieving the type of agreement that we all know we need to. The only way to end plastic pollution is to reduce plastic production.
This could have been a turning point for plastic pollution. It's now just another missed opportunity. Jonah Fisher, BBC News.
Now let's catch up with all the day's sports news. Ollie Foster has that for us. Hello.
Thank you, Jane. Good evening. Liverpool will go 9 points clear at the top of the Premier League today if they beat champions Manchester City at Anfield. They are currently 1-0 up early in the second half. We've already had his first Premier League. In the Scottish Premiership, Rangers beat St Johnstone, their first away win in the league for 2.5 months. It finished 1-0. Former Rangers midfielder Jason Holt scoring an own goal under pressure from James Tavernier. They're 11 points behind leaders Celtic and 7 behind Aberdeen, who drew at Hearts. England's cricketers, they've gone 1-up in the Test series against New Zealand. They won by 8 wickets in Christchurch. Bryden Carse finishing with 10 wickets in the match. Ben Croucher was watching.
The future of English cricket looks to be in pretty safe hands. Granted, it's not been a perfect year, but the beginning of the end of 2024 couldn't have gone much better. Day 4 in Christchurch, 4 wickets to find. Bryden Carse with the ball. Bryden Carse with the breakthrough.
Oh, it's Fuller. It's straight in. The finger's gone up.
5 in the innings. New Zealand went down swinging, pushing the victory target beyond 100. Daryl Mitchell's 84 valiant, but ultimately in vain. Carse had his 10th in the match, the best by an England bowler overseas for 12 years, in only his 3rd test. Jacob Bethel's playing in his first. and wasted no time in chasing down 104 to win. Just 12.4 overs it took England.
Well, that sounds good off the bat.
Bethell was enjoying himself all right. A maiden Test 50 and hitting the winning runs too. A special start to this 3-test tour. Ben Croucher, BBC News.
It's the final of the UK Championship in York, snooker's first Triple Crown event of the season. Barry Hawkins won the final frame of the afternoon session, but he still trails the world #1 Judd Trump 5-3. It's the first to 10 this evening. The penultimate Grand Prix of the Formula One season, that's underway in Qatar. Max Verstappen leads at the moment. You can follow that on the BBC Sport website. Jane.
Thanks very much, Ollie. Thank you. That's it for now. We'll be back with more at 10. Now it's time for the news wherever you are. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.